Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to the Business of Business. Throughout the pandemic, I'll be having a series of conversations with government officials, with senior business people, and with other experts about the impact of COVID on Canadian business and some of the measures we're taking to deal with that. Today, I have a very special guest who's with us. After her 12 seasons on Dragon's Den, Arlene Dickinson is a well-known name to Canadians, but that persona represents only a small part of her extraordinary achievements. She's the author of 3 best-selling books, an investor, a passionate defender of Canadian small businesses, a grandmother of 5, an honorary captain in the Royal Canadian Navy, a dedicated COVID cook, and the general partner of District Ventures Capital, a venture capital firm focused on entrepreneurs and their companies in the food and health space. Phew. Arlene, thanks for finding the time with all of that to be able to join us today.
No, it's my pleasure, Perrin. It's an honor to get to speak to Canadian businesses. So,
a few hours ago, in the middle of the night, and I think that explains how you get so much done. You tweeted this to your 374,000 followers on Twitter. You said this: "I have an idea. It may be crazy, I know, but putting it out there, buy Canadian." Well, it sounds like a pretty simple idea for each of us to help as businesses struggle to make their way through the pandemic. Are we focused as Canadians enough on what we can do to support Canadian businesses at this time?
You know, I think it's a complex question, and a lot of the comments back that you'll see on that, or, is it too expensive, or I can't access these things, and, there isn't enough variety in Canada, I can't get what I need. But, the fact of the matter is that the more we buy Canadian, the cheaper these goods and services will become. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's all about volume. And so I think definitely supporting Canadian business is critical anytime, but in particular right now. And yes, while it's not always about putting, your hands in your pocket and spending something to make a change, you can also support. I created a raving review campaign where you can support simply by putting positive reviews on Google and Yelp so that these businesses can be higher in the search when people are searching for certain items. You can support just by simply helping with small things and words of encouragement. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but it's that simple stuff that tells people to help keep them going, that where you tell them how much you appreciate them. So I think that there's, beyond, of course, buying Canadian, you can support Canadian.
Let's talk for a minute about small businesses, and in particular, about 98% of the businesses in Canada are SMEs. And yesterday, I heard a very well-respected, well-known Canadian economist talking about the impacts of the pandemic and saying that, in his judgment, we could lose up to 10% of the SMEs in Canada. Yeah. From a base of 2 million, we're talking about 200,000 Canadian businesses going out of business.
Mind-blowing.
Is this figure reasonable in your view?
Yes, it is reasonable in my view. And when you multiply those 200,000 businesses by the job loss and the economic impact of those businesses, it's huge. And I think we'll lose that through the pandemic. The question is how many businesses who have just barely made it through the pandemic at the end of this will be able to continue to recover from the pandemic. So, I think that number might be conservative, Perrin. I think we're going to see that 10% happen over the course of the next year. And then after that, I think we're going to continue to see real struggles with established small businesses, because you have to be able to recover to get back to pre-pandemic numbers and revenue in order to be able to really build your business forward.
And most economists expect that we won't be back to the GDP that we saw at the beginning of last year until sometime next year.
Right. So it'll take a while.
A long climb back. And for jobs and employment, that'll take even longer than that, probably.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a bad situation, and of course, it's putting a lot of stress and emotional and mental strain on people as well. So there's an economic impact, but there's also a mental health impact.
As an investor, you'll be looking at the viability of businesses over the long term. One of the questions is, with the degree of government support that there's been for businesses, and wage subsidies, rental subsidies, a range of other loans and assistance, do we have a lot of so-called zombie businesses out there, businesses that are alive in form, but in fact not viable, that when the government support packages get pulled back, simply are forced out of business at that point?
Yeah, and that's basically what I was referring to earlier, that it's one thing to make it through it, it's another thing to be able to build after it. And if the problem is we're keeping people basically, I hadn't heard the term zombie businesses, but they're in hibernation. We've basically given them enough ability to keep the lights on and make sure that their rent is paid, or make sure that their teams are hopefully kept on furlough for a period of time. But we haven't given them the ability to actually recover once, as I said, once it starts, once that funding goes away, what happens? And I believe this is a much more critical area of concern than is being addressed right now by government. I think that we have to help these businesses figure out how they are going to get out of this. Not, it's always when you're in the middle of the storm, it's hard to say, well, how are we going to rebuild? But you actually have to be thinking about the future right now, not just the situation we're in. And the economic measures that are being put in place to help keep these businesses basically alive is not going to be what's going to help them survive and in the long term. And so I think we could be taking advantage of the great infrastructure we have with the accelerators and the incubators that are across Canada. We've, the government's already invested significantly in helping stand up these accelerators and incubators to help small business be able to move their business to the next level, or to help entrepreneurs reimagine how they're working in their businesses today. And if we just applied that skill set to entrepreneurs who are struggling right now, they could actually learn new skills, figure out how to, take advantage of what's happening right now in terms of seeing the opportunity, as opposed to just seeing, how do I just keep the lights on, and help them be stronger and better as entrepreneurs through a very difficult period of time. So I think we can be leveraging existing infrastructure to help that happen.
Now, we're well into the second wave of the pandemic. In your view, is there a qualitative difference in the economic impacts of the second wave from the first wave? For example, for many small businesses across the country, they've accumulated perhaps $100,000, $150,000 worth of debt, and maybe straining at their capacity at this point. Is the situation substantively different from the first wave? And does our response in terms of the support we provide have to be different?
Yes, I mean, you have to ask yourself, if you're a small business owner and you've accumulated the debt and you can't see an opportunity to make the revenue back to be able to pay it back and still make a living, then it becomes a burden, and it becomes overwhelming. And this is where I get into in the first wave, there was a lot of energy and hope and enthusiasm for how, not enthusiasm, I don't think there's ever enthusiasm, but there was a lot of belief that we could kind of struggle through this. Now that it's the second wave and people are really having to think hard about, am I going to take on this debt? Am I going to, have to, I've already mortgaged everything I own. Most of these small business owners, their credit cards are maxed. They've mortgaged everything they own. They have taken advantage of all the government loans, and they're trying really hard to figure out what's next. And it's pretty hard for them to see how they can come out of it. And that's why I say we need programs that are actually talking about the future and how they will come out of this, because right now, many of them are just mired in the mud and they can't get out of it.
Looking at how people are affected and how specific segments of business are affected, clearly, whether it's in Canada or in other parts of the world, small business has really been on the front line here. Everybody gets hit, but small business disproportionately so. Let's look at it, though, from the perspective of sectors. Some sectors appear much harder hit than others. Which ones would you cite as being the ones that have been most hard hit?
Well, I mean, the obvious ones are tourism, travel, and hospitality and restaurants. I mean, those are probably the ones that have had the biggest economic hit to them. It's just hard to, you can't travel. So of course, we have airline industries and, the train sector, all of the travel industries, everyone who supports the travel industries, hospitality, hotels, and then you've got, and then restaurants. I mean, restaurants, small restaurants are, they've been pretty much decimated. They have to figure out a way to serve differently, and many are doing so. And then, yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's really hard to watch and see.
Can we take a couple of minutes on the issue of the hospitality sector and how they're affected? You mentioned restaurants, for example. What we hear from the restaurant sector is they've invested heavily in PPEs, so that they've had significant capital costs. They've trained their staff. They're required to maintain capacity even when they're open at a fraction of what they would have in normal times. They keep on getting shut down and having to write off all their investment on food, and then having to restock afterward. Are there specific measures that we could be looking at for restaurants to assist them and to ensure that our communities don't lose what's such a vital part of the quality of life in every part of Canada?
I mean, certainly anything to do with policy that is tax related is going to make a difference right now. I mean, I think that's an area that we have to be thinking about. And I recognize and I understand the dilemma of government, where as we put money out, we have to think about how we can get out of the deficit we're creating. However, in desperate times like these, we have to think less about that deficit and more about what the measures are we can take to keep people's livelihoods intact, to ensure that there is accessibility and access to food, and a supply chain that is viable and safe, to ensure that restaurant owners and their staff are able to figure out a way through this. So supporting them with programming, supporting them with opportunity, supporting them with simply just better policy and tax decisions. So I think it's a very difficult place. And I understand that the dilemma is exactly what I just said, which is, we can't just print money. But in this case, I think we actually do need to just print money. and while that's perhaps not a popular view, I actually think it is the only view to getting through this, because otherwise the impact long term in the deficit, we're now talking about a deficit that is so significant and so big that adding to it to ensure is really not the question. The question is, are we putting in measures that are actually working? Yes. Are the things that are happening with the government right now, are they actually the right things? And I believe that there's many places where government is thinking it's doing the right thing, but is not necessarily really understanding the situation properly.
And I think that's correct. I think we have to cut them some slack in that for all of us, we're making it up as we go along. And
right.
Have deserved credit for moving out programs quickly and for 100%. Making changes when it's necessary to fine tune them. And I think most Canadians would differentiate between short-term emergency spending to help during a crisis, where's the role of government to do that, and long-term structural spending that simply builds a permanent deficit in. In the short term, the challenge that government has is to keep people alive, both as individuals and as businesses. And then we will have to deal with the issue of the deficit and where we go. But the assumption being that it's better to wake up with a headache than not to wake up.
Yeah, well, I hadn't heard that line before, Perrin, but I like it. And I would say that you're right. We have to think about the short term, but we do also have to think about the long term. And we do have to plan for the future. We do, not to be in any way negative or sound like a pessimist, but let's assume that there will be another pandemic from another virus at some point in the future. So we need infrastructure. We do need to think about investing and ensuring that the right things are in place so that we are more prepared for the next time. And that requires long-term thinking, that requires planning. And then we also have to think about the long-term viability, as we just have been talking about, of these businesses into the future. So yes, big respect to the government. I don't want to, I'm certainly not suggesting that, I don't care who is in power. These are difficult times to navigate. it doesn't matter what party is navigating it. It matters what leadership is doing about, with what they have at hand. And there's going to be missteps. There's going to be things that they don't understand because they've never done it before. These are challenging times for leaders of businesses, for leaders of communities, for leaders of government. But this is the time to ensure that we are, moving quickly. When things aren't working, we're, pivoting fast, and we're making sure that we continue to experiment and try to get it right, because small business has been impacted a lot with some of the shutdown regulations that has not impacted big business the same way. And all I can say for myself is I don't want to live in a world where the only choice I have is from big business. I do not want to live in that world, because entrepreneurialism dies, innovation dies, the ability to access a variety of products and goods and services, pricing strategies get changed. When we only have a few businesses in business and they control the market, your entire variety, pricing, and opportunity changes, and it becomes monopolistic, and it becomes very difficult for Canadians to live in the opportunity world we have today of pricing, better pricing, better variety, better opportunity, better jobs, innovation, economic impact. These are things that small business brings. And when we shut down small business and we allow big business to continue to operate, we are making, I think, poor choices.
The economic cost is high, and the social costs perhaps even higher if we lose our small businesses and communities across the country. Can we come back to restaurants for a minute? You were mentioning taxation. One of the areas, when you order a glass of beer, you're drinking more tax than you are hops, or a glass of wine, it's more tax than it is grape. And yet the government put in place a few years ago an automatic escalator on the alcohol tax on wine that went up again this year. Would it be your argument that this should have been frozen and that we should not be increasing taxes on the sector at this time?
Yeah, I would not be increasing taxes on the sector at this time. I mean, I'm waiting with some trepidation to see what happens in March when we get yes, I think it's a mistake to put taxes on small business at this time in any form. I mean, the liquor structure in Canada and how the borders and the provinces and how it all works is probably so archaic. It needs a complete overhaul and revamp and rethink of which taxes would be part of that.
Can I ask for your advice as an investor? Not that I have the money to invest, but you're experienced here. Let's look again at the restaurant sector, and let me put a contrarian proposal to you. What we're seeing right now is a dramatic decrease in terms of capacity in the hospitality sector and hotel space, and also in restaurants seats as well. If it's possible to think beyond the pandemic to 6 months, a year from now, when we're looking at it from the rearview mirror and we're starting to resume more ordinary lives and can go out again, and Canadians feel safe to travel, to go to a hotel, to visit a restaurant. Through the pandemic, savings rates have gone up. That's the first time ever in a recession that I can recall, as a result of all of the transfers. And all of us are feeling cabin fever. I suspect there will be enormous desire on the part of Canadians to get back with their ordinary lives, to have a meal out, stay in a hotel, to travel in Canada. Is this, for investors, a good time for them to be thinking about making investments in the sector later this year, or as we get into next year, that will be finding reduced capacity, but dramatically increased demand as we come out of the pandemic?
Yeah, listen, I think your focus is in that question is on restaurants, but I think in general, from an investment perspective, my fund is District Ventures Capital. It invests in the food and health, consumer goods category, and beauty. And we started betting on that space about 5 years ago. And we started betting on that space because at the root of it, globally, food and health is of utmost importance. And at the root of it, Canada has expertise in agriculture, agri-food, and in health innovation, like almost no other country in the world. So betting on Canadian innovation and betting on companies that are creating packaged goods, productizing the ingredient base that we have, instead of us shipping ingredients all over the world, turning them into goods here and then exporting them around the world, so that we become a nation of exporting food and health products. That, to me, is so investable that I raised a fund in the space. So if I, my bet is squarely on thinking that people are going to care more and more and more about eating healthy, about staying healthy, about ensuring that they're taking better care of themselves through what they consume and they drink. So, healthy beverages, healthy food, healthy products, wellness products, and even our beauty products being more in tune with the environment. So yes, short answer is yes, invest in the space. In the restaurant industry, yes, we have to believe it. When things are worse, you can't imagine it's going to get better and that it's going to recover. Yes, it's going to recover. It may look different than it does today, but it's absolutely going to be still that people are going to want to eat out and want to go and explore, the country and the world. And that, I do not believe, is ever going to go away. It's just going to maybe look a little bit different than it does today, but it's a very investable space.
When you mentioned food and health, with every crisis in the past, and particularly with pandemics, we've seen that these have had permanent impacts in terms of people's behavior afterward. And it's not surprising if people's focus coming out of the pandemic will be, what can I do to protect my health and the health of my family? Right. So it would seem for a wise investor, this would be a good area to be looking at.
I really, to me, it's so obvious. It just feels absolutely where we should be placing our bet on Canadian entrepreneurs and Canadian innovation. And if you have a bet to make, you first bet on yourself. I absolutely bet on you, and then bet on your friend or your person that you meet in your community who's actually the entrepreneur who's got the innovative idea in the space, because I believe that they are going to help change our world.
Let's talk for a minute about women in business. One of the great stories of recent years has been the explosion in entrepreneurship among women. So many of the independent businesses in Canada have been started by women, yet they've been particularly hard hit during the pandemic. Can you comment on your sense as to what the impact of the pandemic has been on women in Canada?
Yeah, it's a real, it's a big concern to me. I think we, in some respects, have gone back 50 years as it relates to, how women are now kind of bearing the brunt again of taking care of the family. And so what you see is a lot of female entrepreneurs or female women who have careers are finding themselves doing a couple things. They become, again, the caregiver for the seniors, for their parents who are really struggling through this right now. And I think that's another topic, what's happening in long-term care facilities and in general in Canada is you should do a show on that, because it's really, there's lots to be said there. But I think, women are now taking care of their parents. They're also taking care of their children. So children who are at home, who are having to be homeschooled because their schools are shut down. For some reason, this responsibility has shifted back to women. It is not shifting back to men. And you're seeing women who have careers or either they're single and entrepreneurs, or they're married and they're entrepreneurs, or they are having a career and they're actually doing everything. They're taking care of their home. They're taking care of their kids, they're taking care of their parents, and they're trying to have a career. Well, that's not sustainable for anybody. Eventually, something gives, and especially when it's a lockdown and they're really left to their own devices. They're not able to have parents come in and support them. In fact, they're not even sure how they can get to their parents to help them. So mental health in this case is extremely precarious. We're seeing an increase in domestic abuse. We're seeing an increase because you see people at home together in small spaces, and you see a lot of people, erupting with anger, and these issues are again predominantly directed at women. So yes, I've listed off a litany of reasons why this is a significant issue for our country, and we've got to pay attention. I believe that we are going to be seeing the effects of this get worse and worse and worse from a mental health perspective.
So what can we do in terms of relieving some of the burden for women as caregivers? Obviously, if schools reopen, that will have an impact. The provision of adequate and affordable childcare will also be essential for women to be able to get back to work. What other measures can be taken that will be helpful here? Can we, in that context, can we look, for example, at are lockdowns a good idea? Do we properly weigh the social costs of lockdowns in terms of drug addiction, in terms of family violence, family breakdown, mental health issues, and so on? Are those adequately considered when we look at options?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an epidemiologist, so I can't tell you whether lockdowns are the right idea. But from what I understand from science, they are the only thing that we can do right now to mitigate the spread of COVID. And so lockdowns make sense to me in some respects. But I think if we're going to lock down, then we have to provide, as you said, the resources and the understanding of the impact of that lockdown on not just women, but people in general, and have resources available to support them. We're seeing the healthcare system under duress because there aren't enough, the healthcare workers, A, we don't have enough healthcare workers, B, they are constantly under barrage in terms of the volume of work they're taking on. So thinking about daycares or thinking about other structures where there's, smaller groups of kids going to classes together, community-based schooling, there's got to be other solutions where we can find ways to help teachers get to the children without the children being in the home, but being together in a way that is protected, making sure that there's safety in the schools, that they're sanitized properly, that they have the right PPE, that the teachers are protected, that the kids are protected. I believe there has to be a way to do that. So having your kids home and school shut down, it feels to me like it's exasperating, not actually abetting the problem. But again, I am not a health professional or a scientist. You have to believe that they're making the right choices, but if those choices have impact, then they have to figure out how to mitigate the impact. And that's what I'm not seeing enough of. I'm seeing the lockdown. I'm just not seeing enough of here's what we're going to do to help you through that lockdown.
Looking at the impacts of the pandemic, we mentioned women as an example of one demographic group that has been particularly hard hit. But we can look at it in other areas as well, that it almost tracks income. So immigrants to Canada who tend to have lower incomes than people born in Canada do. Younger people, women, there are a number of others. The impacts of the pandemic are very inequitable in the country. Have you given thought to what sort of policy measures we should be looking at? I think all of us want to see growth return, but all of us want to see growth that is fairly shared as well, where everybody has an opportunity. Are there measures that you can think of that we should be focusing on to ensure that people don't get left behind?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I often think I can be accused of being very socialist when I say this, but I'm gonna, I believe that, and universal income is one of those things that, people talk about a lot, and saying that there needs to be a basic level of income for everybody. And I do believe that to be true. I think giving, I tweeted, if you follow me on Twitter, then I tweeted that I think every Canadian who makes less than the average or median salary should be given a check for $5,000. I believe in putting the capital in the hands of the people that need it and trusting them to do the right thing. And they will save, they will invest, they will spend, and they will actually help themselves get out of the problems that they're in, because they, through no fault of their own, and so in particular, these hard hit demographics that you've mentioned and sectors of people that you've talked about, they should be absolutely given opportunity to get themselves out of where they are. And one of those things is a livable wage. One of those things is a good minimum wage. One of those things is ensuring that people are paid fairly and equally. So, no matter their gender, no matter their race, no matter, any of those things. So those are the things that I believe in, and I think, and hold to be true. These are values I hold to be true, that, wealth needs to be not something that's held by just a few, and everybody should have opportunity. Everybody should have opportunity to succeed.
And that's certainly, from our perspective of the Canadian Chamber, it's shared opportunity. It's right. Ensuring that everybody has a chance to get ahead if they're prepared to work and right. If they show the initiative. Arlene, unfortunately, time flies, so we perhaps have time for only one more question. What strikes me in talking to you is not only that you're clear-eyed in terms of what the impact of the pandemic has been, but that there's an underlying optimism that we will get through this and that there are brighter days ahead. My final question to you would be, looking down the road, how do you see us as we emerge from the tunnel? What will the economy look like in Canada? And are you basically an optimist about where we go from here?
I am certainly I am an optimist in general, parents, and sometimes maybe not necessarily for all the right reasons. I just sometimes just am. I feel fortunate to be optimistic in my life, but I do think our economy, if we don't do some things differently, we will run the risk, as I said, of having a few businesses really have too much control in our economy and in our outlook of the economy and our ability to grow. So I'd like to see some shifts in thinking around the value. You know, we talk over and over and over again about how small business is the backbone of our economy and how small business employs the majority of the people and how small business contributes. Yet we are not helping small business enough right now. We are not doing the right things, I believe, to help an economy grow into the future that's going to be strong and viable and innovative. And so if we want an innovation economy in the future, that means we have to bet on entrepreneurs. That means we have to support them in a way we never have before. It means we have to create a star system of them and elevate them and escalate them and make them visible and reward them. This whole tall poppy syndrome in Canada has got to stop. We've got to encourage risk-taking. We've got to encourage people who are prepared to put their hands up. We've got to stop politicizing everything, and we've got to do the right thing. And so I'm very optimistic that Canadians are pragmatic and that we're pioneering spirits and that we have lots of hard work and a real true care for each other. I mean, what makes us different than America is we are about the we. We are not about the I. But having said that, we need to be about the we to make the we stronger. And in order to do that, we have to continually invest in the individuals who are going to get us there. So yeah, that was probably a long-winded answer to say I love Canada. I am like hand over heart. I love this nation so very much. And I'm an immigrant. Yeah, I'm optimistic, but we got work to do.
We've got to make sure that we do the right thing. And you're an example of what immigration does for Canada in terms of creating the opportunities for Canadians. Well, Arlene, you've set out an ambitious agenda for us. It's been a fascinating, fascinating half hour, and your passion for the country and for business is evident. Thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for all that you do to support Canadian business.
Thanks, Perrin. Sorry for the tears, but you know, I guess I always say don't apologize for the tears. I love this country.
It shows.
Thanks, Perrin.